So Celia tagged me to do the old books tag, and so I thought I would do that. It's going to be a little bit difficult for me because I'm trying to remember what I do and don't still own, given that my books are spread across two houses at this point. I left about half my collection with my parents, and so I think I'm going to go just based on the books that I have here at my home, which is only about half my collection. So question 1 asks, have you ever bought a book that was made before you were born? The physical book, not the text. The answer is obviously yes. I do read a lot of older books, and I'm a mid-90s baby, so obviously a lot of the books that I own, possibly 40%, maybe even 50% of the books I own, were actually printed before I was born. Yeah. Question 2, which book on your shelves takes place in the oldest time period? Victorian, medieval, Stone Age. I suppose I could go with Shakespeare. Julius Caesar, I have the complete works of Shakespeare over there. Julius Caesar is set pretty far back. I might have one set farther back, but I don't really know. Question 3, have you got a book that was originally published in the same year that you were born? It's quite likely. I'm not about to dig through several hundred books to find one that was published in 1994. There's definitely one here somewhere, but I'm not motivated enough to look just for the sake of a single video. Instead, I'll show you my new mug that I was also holding in my recent reads video on Friday, but I got it at Chapters. It was like 30% off, and it says it's always time for tea, and it came with a little strainer basket inside. So I think this mug is much better than talking about a book that was printed in 1994. Question 4. Which book on your shelves have you had for the longest? This is a difficult one because I'm trying to remember back into my childhood, into my teenage years. In terms of my shelves here, it's quite likely my copy of, where did it go? My copy of Two Solitudes by Hugh MacLean, my trade paperback copy that I have here in Ottawa, because I picked up that one when I was in my last year of high school for my English class. I had a comparative literature assignment for my grade 12 English. I had the opportunity to choose whichever literary classic I wanted. My teacher took us down to the library. The librarian had a bunch of books spread out. I went with Two Solitudes by Hugh MacLean because I wanted something that was Canadian, something that nobody else really wanted to choose. A lot of people were going with, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, that sort of thing. And I went with Hugh MacLean, and the copy I got from the library turned out to be, I'm going to call it an abridged version that had been put together in the 70s or the 80s, I believe, specifically for high school students. So it was published specifically for high school students, and for whatever reason, they had cut off about the last third of the book. Without that last third of the book, it's really quite a different novel. When you cut that off, it makes it much more political. You get a different tone. If you leave on that third, then you really get the message of the novel. And I wanted my own copy, and so it was a shock for me when I picked up that paperback secondhand to realize that there was almost 100, 150 pages more of the novel when I thought I was finished. But yeah, that's probably the oldest book that I have here. At my parents' place, I've got some of my children's books, so I've got I Want to Go Home by Gordon Corman, which I'm pretty sure I've owned since I was 9 or 10. I have a copy of If I Just Had Two Wings. I'm forgetting the author of that book, but that's one I read when I was 8. I don't believe I got my actual copy until I was maybe 11 or 12. My grandmother got it for me as a gift after I asked for it, and I believe she actually read it before I did and loved it. Question 5. Which book have you had the longest but never read? I think it's most likely my copy of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. I've had that going on 2.5, 3 years now. I've started it, but it's not the most gripping and engaging read ever, so I've struggled to get into that. What's the oldest book you own? I think it's likely my George Eliot edition, so I've got 3 of them. My copy of The Mill on the Floss, and these are all from 1888. But just to give you a taste, I've got a copy of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. No publication date in this, but I'm guessing early 1900s, just based on how thick the paper is, the illustrations inside, and the binding. I also have The Winning of Popular Government by Archibald MacMeechan. I always struggle with this name, and there's nothing online to tell me how to pronounce it, because he's not exactly that well known. And I believe the publication date isn't listed in this one either. I paid $20 for this on the Canadiana shelf at Black Squirrel Books here in Ottawa, in the Glebe. Yeah, it says copyright in all countries subscribing to the Berne Convention, but it doesn't give me a publication date. It does, however, say that it's dedicated to Robert Alexander Falconer, President of the University of Toronto, student of history, and encourager of historians. So if I could look up this particular president, find out when he was president of U of T, I could probably find out approximately when this book was published. I also have a Shakespeare collection, which I believe is likely from the early 1900s. I've got the entire set. They're something that was passed down to me by my grandpa, who lives in the States. He's American, and they belonged to his father, I believe. They've been in the family a couple generations, and I tried to do some research at some point to find the publication date, but I had very little success, other than finding out that somewhere between the 1890s and the 1930s, the publisher whose name is in this book existed. I think it's the correct publisher, it's hard to say. And then I have from 1906, I believe, a Harvard Classics edition of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nation. And I've actually owned this one since my last year of high school as well. Oh, that's funny. I've still got the sticky note in here. This is a book that I actually had left behind at my parents' place. And last summer, I decided I wanted to read it, and my dad was coming up Ottawa way with his ride group, and they were going to be camping about an hour from here, and he was going to drop in for a couple hours on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon before I had to go to work, when he had some free time. And he didn't have a lot of storage space, obviously, because I think I don't think he had a tent with him, because he was using someone else's tent that they had brought along. But his saddlebags were full of clothing and food for the weekend. But I asked him if he would try to fit in my Adam Smith into one of the saddlebags, and he managed to do that. And so it arrived with a note from my mother on the cover, as if he would have forgotten that Adam Smith in a saddlebag was for his daughter. But anyway, let's see. Question 7. Which book do you have that was written the longest time ago? I have a copy of Plato's Republic around here somewhere. I think it's under the bed because I'm going to be getting rid of it. But arguably that one was written the longest ago. If I don't include that, then it would probably be the Shakespeare on my shelf over there. So I think this tag has already pretty much made the rounds. I've been a few steps back from book 2 lately, so I can't really tell you who has and who hasn't done it, but I know a lot of people have, so I'm not going to try to tag anyone, but if you'd like to do it, consider yourself tagged.